America is undeniably one of the most liberated countries in the world, but it was not the case before. In fact, there is a long history of struggle when it comes to homosexual liberty in the country. Even today, the stigma remains. And if recognition of the community remains the bare minimum, LGBTQ+ people will continue to fight for their place in America. Before we tackle the modern era, let's first take a trip back in history and learn more about the little-known or hidden lives of gays in America and how they were able to conquer the concrete jungle. Hollywood was born gay. It's very important that we start with Hollywood. There have been calls for more LGBTQ representation in Hollywood films over the past several years, but I bet only a few people know that the first film to ever win Best Picture at the Academy Awards was Willem A. Wellman's 1927 film entitled Wings, which was also the first major Hollywood production to depict a gay kiss. This was a big deal back in the day, especially when people were still less accepting of the thought of two men kissing or women falling in love with one another. Despite the controversial plot, Wings was a box office smash. And while Hollywood films started to transition into sounds, Wings' silent film still bagged the Best Picture award. But Wings is actually not where the story begins, because even before, many stories of gay people have been surfacing on and off the screen of American cinema. And those stories had to be told since it was extremely costly to come out as gay, or more likely, to be outed against one's will on a professional and social level. And I think most of you will agree that a lot of powerful men in the country could tremble just by being associated with a suspected homosexual. Many documentaries on the internet will tell you to evaluate the more general human and societal impact of such witch hunts on gay Americans working in government. And there has always been a stigma in the industry. LGBTQ+ actors, directors, executives, and tradesmen who helped transform Hollywood from a sleepy orange grove in California into the city where millions of young aspirants travel each year never gained proper recognition. Yes, they were given credit one way or another, but most of the time, they were mentioned in the footnotes, but only in microscopic print. But this didn't stop them, and even in small steps, they continued to pioneer the earliest representation in American movies. And little did we know, Hollywood had been producing queer films with hidden homosexuality concepts in them as a form of protest. Bury your gays. The enormous attempts made by Hollywood to hide homosexuality in film during the post-war Lavender Panic era began to unravel as the film industry moved away from suburban perfection. Hollywood eventually understood that they were alienating a sizable population. The lifeblood of Hollywood at the time was love dramas, Disney and family-friendly cartoons, and biblical epics. Nevertheless, they eventually discovered that a segment of Americans with discretionary wealth but little to spend it on was being left out. Take note, we're not talking about gay people here. Going back, teenagers who were angry to fight back against their parents' conservative, constricting outlook on life. This rebellious mentality created possibly the most renowned adolescent dissident film ever made, which was Rebel Without a Cause. The movie made generalizations about alternative sexual behavior and the substitutes provided by gang ritualism. There is homoerotic tension throughout the movie, and the affection in the film's depictions of gang conduct must be concealed in a separate vocabulary, both spoken and unspoken, inside gestures and phrases that render everything callous and cruel. Men, those days, felt like living in a physical intimacy that is unlike any other because of World War II. Because of these factors, men were experiencing intimacy with other men that they had never known before, and the film's plot reflects exactly that. Many LGBTQ+ activists and supporters see the pattern as proof of a hostile political and cultural environment toward the community as a whole. They claim that these movies reinforced negative preconceptions of queer people as unwell, immoral, and dangerous, and led to a culture of fear and shame surrounding queer identities. In those days, films started featuring LGBTQ+ characters who commit or attempt to commit suicide because of reasons connected to or caused by being part of the community. Thus the saying, "Bury your gays." Gay people continued to feature on some of the most well-known TV programs in the world during the 1970s, including Dallas and MASH. In 1979, the groundbreaking documentary Before Stonewall was released. The documentary traces the development of the queer community in America, using historical material, interviews with activists and scholars, and first-person testimonies. It emphasizes LGBT people's experiences across the country and in a range of social contexts, including the arts, politics, and even sports. The movie highlights the lives of individuals like Sylvia Rivera, a transgender activist who was instrumental in the Stonewall riots, and Bayard Rustin, an African-American homosexual civil rights pioneer who collaborated with Martin Luther King. With the growing queer political power structure emerging in California, New York, and D.C., as well as a new generation of gay filmmakers starting to catch Hollywood's attention, it seemed like gays were ready to rip down those closet doors for good. New era. On June 28, 1969, the Stonewall Inn was raided by New York City police. At first, authorities thought it was just another raid, but they were not expecting the inn's patrons to fight back by flinging rocks and bottles at the cops. 2 further riots broke out in the area the next week in protest. The revolution sparked a new wave of militant homosexual liberation. A new generation of activist organizations, such as the Gay Liberation Front and the Gay Activist Alliance, arose. These new organizations, like the Homosexual movement, fought to eradicate discrimination against gays and lesbians. Unlike homophile organizations, however, these gay liberation activists used much more forceful tactics throughout the 1970s. And it was undeniable that the rise of the gay liberation movement was the start of the homophile approach to gay rights to finally end. Just a few weeks after the Stonewall incident, the largest gathering of gay and lesbian activists to date took place. It was called the 1969 Nacho Convention. However, things didn't go as smoothly after the resolutions to form a new Committee on Unity were forgotten in the whirlwind of fresh activism that followed the uprising. The conference's meeting the following year in San Francisco became its final after younger activists urged that the organization broaden its operations in order to link with other social protests, such as the Black Power movement. Yet, the militancy of the gay liberation movement would not have been conceivable without the homophile organizations laying the groundwork. Their publications helped to establish the sense of national community that emerged after Stonewall, and many homophile militants helped to establish gay liberation organizations. Even Kansas City's Phoenix Society contributed to the emergence of LGBT rights by disseminating books that encouraged new types of advocacy. And although Stonewall became a symbol of progress, it was organizations such as the Phoenix Society that helped shape history and kicked off the new era for homosexuality in America. The Secret City and its Politics. James Kirchick, a historian, makes an effort in his new book, Secret City, to memorialize the LGBT men and women who served and made contributions to their country in Washington, D.C. When Kirchick relocated to Washington, D.C. in 2007, he discovered that the city was infused with a vibrant homosexual cultural life and history, which piqued his interest in the idea of a gay history of American power politics. In fact, according to census data, D.C. has the greatest percentage of LGBT people in the entire U.S. Back in time, gay people were subject to widespread surveillance, social stigma, arrest, and threats of psychiatric incarceration. President Dwight D. Eisenhower's 1953 Executive Order 10450, which resulted in the investigation and expulsion of thousands of LGBTQ individuals from the federal government, marked the beginning of the Lavender Scare, a period of moral panic that occurred concurrently with the anti-communist Red Scare. As a result, being a queer person in the government comes with the knowledge that you might be investigated. And this sad reality was narrated in the book which follows the life of Bob Waldron, a competent administrative assistant who worked on Capitol Hill in the 1950s and 1960s and was loaned to Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson during that time. Waldron kept his sexual orientation a secret and learned how to be as covert as possible about his identity and became adept at dodging questions about his love relationships. Waldron was present in 1963 to assist Johnson in the transition after President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. And it appeared as though Waldron's dream of working for the U.S. president was coming true. Johnson requested that Waldron submit a job application after stating that he intended to add Waldron to the White House staff. Around this time, a background investigation got going. Interviews with more than 100 people revealed that the vast majority of them were in favor of him. However, one man said that Waldron had homosexual tendencies and related a tale about Waldron making a pass at him. And just like that, Waldron's application for a job was turned down. In the end, there is no telling what Waldron may have accomplished if he hadn't been saddled with the same secret that dashed the hopes of so many other young people and ultimately resulted in his own destruction. His situation wasn't particularly unusual in this sense, but the fact that he was close to Johnson shows how even someone who was unwaveringly devoted to one of the nation's most astute leaders was susceptible to devastation just because of his sexual orientation. The book is a work of fiction, but it made the readers wonder how this kind of scenario would often translate in real life, especially during the earlier eras in America when people were still conservative and non-accepting of topics like this. But America is no longer the same, at least when it comes to acceptance for members of the community. As the modern era unfolded, there is more liberty and freedom, but the fight is not yet over, and there is still a long way to go. That's it for today's video. Make sure to give this a like and subscribe for more stories from history.